Hi, everybody. Mike Bloom here, back with another preseason podcast for Survivor 50. As I'm giving you what you need to know about the illustrious cast of Survivor's 50th season. And today, dun 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 dun, this just in, over half a decade away from Fiji, much like one of his favorite televised characters, Rick Devens, had to go back. And indeed, he did, as one of the biggest stars of The Edge of Extinction has returned for his second, maybe technically third try at the $1 million. But what did his superstar game in season 38 involve, and how might that play into season 50? I brought in a guy who's got you the scoop on what you need to know about Rick Devens. It is the one, the only Jordan Kalish.
Yes, this just in. Jordan Kalish, with very similar glasses to Rick Devens, is here to talk about one of his Survivor idols. How will it fare for him on season 50?
All right, so are you speaking are you bloviating a little bit here? Is he really one of your idols, or are you just saying that because of the similar shapes of your glasses?
Well, I have always been a Rick Devens fan. I have been someone who has I was very much rooting for Rick Devens when he was on his original season. Do I think that he was the strongest player on the Edge of Extinction? Probably not. He was voted out in the pre-merge, but so was the winner of the season. And once we got to the end game, I 100% wanted Rick Devens to win the game. The story of the Edge of Extinction really is the story of Rick Devens. And I think that he is one of the best characters of the 30s era of Survivor. He, strategic wise, I think he has a great strategic mind, which we'll get into. However, didn't always work out for him on all the votes, but I do really like Rick Devens. He's one of the people that's been on my short list to come back if I were the casting director of Survivor, which I'm not. But I am so happy to see him back.
Thank you for confirming that, by the way. A lot of people
I do not
cast that you are Jesse Tannenbaum.
Yes, I'm Jesse Tannenbaum. I think the cast would look a lot nerdier if I were casting Survivor.
Well, talk dirty to me here, Jordan. You say that Edge of Extinction is the story of Rick Devens. So try your best to tell that story to us proper. Who is Rick Devens?
Sure. So Rick Devens is a news anchor. And like a news anchor, Rick Devens is a polished TV character, which a lot of times from these original, with these first-time Survivor players, you don't always get that. I think we got it with Savannah last season, and we saw that in for confessionals. She's made for TV. I think Rick Devens is similarly made for TV because he has all that experience. So he comes in. He is on the original Manu tribe, which gets decimated. They lose the first 3 challenges. He swaps. He gets put on a tribe with all of his original castmates, with the exception of Wendy, who would have been the next one voted out. He ends up being the first person voted out after the swap. So he, despite his, once he enters the game, he's a challenge beast. His tribe was not a tribe of challenge beasts, and they lost everything. So Rick Devens does go out. But early on in the game, he was in a very good spot on his original tribe. He's able to go to the Edge of Extinction. He's able to come back. He makes his big return and gets all the way to the Final Four, where he loses in the fire making challenge to the eventual winner, Chris Underwood, who spent basically the whole game on the edge. And Chris, I believe, received a lot of information from the jury on how to win Survivor with that specific jury. So Chris knew he had to put himself into fire against Rick in order to win.
And that's because going into the finale, I'd say from both a game perspective as well as maybe from an edit perspective, a lot of people were thinking this was Rick's season to lose. So let's get into some stats about Rick Devens and the historic season that he put together. Rick Devens' current age is 41 years old. Hopes to drop the 4, keep the 1 there perhaps. Originally, as you said, came from the season of Edge of Extinction, where he lived on there for a certain portion of time. He placed 4th. Spent 6 days on the edge, but played 38 days total, being voted out, or eliminated, I should say, in the penultimate game. As you said, only won 1 challenge in the pre-merge, went to Tribal Council for each of the first 4 episodes, but when he came back, he did so in full force as he won 7 individual challenges, and that includes 4 immunity challenges. I think a lot of people attribute Rick's game largely to idols and advantages, of which he found 3. He played 4 because he came back from the edge with a half idol. That makes him the person who has played the most idols, I think, in a single season of US Survivor. He ties Russell and Ben and Ty and Tony for finding 3 idols in the season. But he got a lot of attention, Jordan, considering we look at votes against here, and it is a dirty dozen. And that's not just because he was unanimously voted out in his first time, but really the narrative towards the end game is that Rick Devens becomes this major target. He's won a couple of immunity challenges, and everyone decides to turn on him. He loses his closest ally in David Wright. And so pretty much the entire narrative, I would say, for the latter third of the season is Rick Devens finding a way to find a way, be it a necklace, be it an idol, be it something in between, to escape the vote time after time.
Yeah, there are some players in Survivor history who have found idols that don't necessarily need them. Like they're on the top, they're in a good spot, and they happen to go out and find an idol because I think being on the top gives you a little bit of cushion where you're able to go into the woods without bringing a lot of attention to yourself. Rick Devens is the opposite. Rick Devens was on the bottom for a lot of the game. In the post-merge part of the game, he was in the minority on 6 different votes and was still the person who was considered the favorite to win at the Final Four for being a big character, for being so bombastic at Tribal Council and funny. I think every single person on that season, even if he got on their nerves a little bit, I think they all found him funny and they all respected him. But he needed to find these idols. 2 of the idols that he found, he used on himself, and some of those votes that he received were negated because he knew when to play them. He knew that I'm getting votes at this Tribal. On the Ron Clark vote, he plays an idol, he goes home. And then on the Victoria vote, who Victoria, I think, is also a really, just from rewatching the season, such a good strategic player, and I actually think the best player of Survivor Edge of Extinction. She goes out when Rick plays his idol. So he needed the challenge wins. He needed the idols. At the final 5, he had an idol that he was able to play on Gavin. And we'll talk about some of the creative things he did strategically, because I think he's a very, very creative Survivor player. But he needed all of the wins and all of the idols that he found in order to even get that far in the game after coming back from the edge.
It's so interesting to see him come back, because I think back to the reception Rick Devens had at the time. And it's weird to say that he is a bit of a polarizing figure. And I think it maybe comes from 2 different camps. One of it being the edit. I think that even the biggest Rick Devens lover, such as yourself, Jordan, might feel that he was overexposed. We got a lot of Rick all the time, to the point where, again, people assume that he would win because he got so much content, when it turns out that no, the people loved him. Sia loved him. He got 100K for it. But the other side of it is perhaps the fact that Rick, as we mentioned before, largely got by through immunity challenge wins and idol finds and subsequent plays, which we had experienced a few seasons before with Ben Driebergen. He certainly drew a lot of comparisons to that when people inevitably thought he would get the win. I think, a lot of people respected more of the games like a Victoria, for example, that was more so survivability through social strategic maneuvers, not necessarily being good at challenges and finding idols, which are big components of the game, especially in the 30s. But I think it definitely earned Rick maybe a mixed reputation at the time.
Yeah, I think that there's this idea out there that Rick was not a good social player. I do think that Rick played a good social game, just from the fact I think he was very well liked by the majority of the people on the season. I did say before, he sometimes did, I think, maybe go a little bit too far. He was kind of a petty guy, which is great TV. There were plenty of times where he was very sarcastic, where he would joke around at Tribal. I think he used his humor in stressful situations in order to ease the tension, but sometimes I think that makes the people around him even more tense. I think he does it for himself, and I'm someone who does that too. So I think I see some of myself in Rick Devens. But I have a pros and cons list, and on the cons list,
please, yeah,
I have other people's perception of him. And going into my rewatch, in my mind, I was like, okay, Rick was only aligned with David Wright. They saw that they were close, and that's why he got voted out. When he gets swapped to the Lesu tribe, which is really just the new Manu tribe minus Wendy.
Plus minus the camp as well. I'm pretty sure they had to start over from scratch.
Yes, they did. They did, which was tough on them. But then they lose the next challenge and they go to Tribal Council. it's really kind of a love fest at Lesu. They don't want to lose. It's not like they're throwing the challenge to get rid of him. They lose, and you have a strong 3-person alliance, and Kelly War Dog and Lauren, and he did probably make his alliance with David Wright too obvious. They were bonding the whole time. Everyone saw that they were a duo, and they unfortunately got swapped with the trio who voted them out. I don't consider it getting swap screwed, because swap screwed means you get swapped with people from the other tribe and they just vote you out because they're in the majority. So I don't think he got swap screwed. I don't think that would be fair to say. But he did get put in a spot that was not optimal for him on the swap. It would have actually been better, I think, if he had ended up with a couple of comma people. I think that there were enough cracks there that he could have maybe gotten through the merge without having to go to the edge first. But I did write with on my other people's perception of him. There were times where Kelly and Lauren would talk about Devens that he was the most likely from that Manu group to flip. So whether that's true or not, that is something that people were saying about him. I don't think that it had anything to do with them not liking him. I think they just saw his wheels always spinning. They always saw him working and like going into the woods and looking for idols and talking to everybody. And I think that maybe he needs to be a little bit more secretive when he comes back about his strategizing. He needs to strategize. He's a guy that he needs to, make allies quickly, because if not, he could be looked at as a major target. But I think that he needs to maybe spread the love a little bit and align with more people outside of just like who he sees as his number one person. And I think that did screw him on the swap. And I think that, the fact that he was not really in the majority all that much post merge, I think he was liked, but not necessarily trusted.
Yeah, that's a very good way to put it. And I want to stick on the cons for a second before we get to the numerous pros that he has, because I would say probably the biggest weakness Rick has as a player is that he is very extroverted, which is great from a character perspective, great from a personal perspective. And I think one of the biggest things that he was able to do was bring the fireworks and the entertainment to Tribal Council, which I think got a lot of the jury on his side. He was doing a lot of big things. He was able to take advantage of the fact that he had idols, that he could say, hey, you can see exactly what I'm doing right now. I don't have to tell it through recall to you what I was able to do, jury. Look at the moves that I am making. It did not necessarily, vibe completely positively with the people that were currently in the game. I think back to a scene at the merge when Rick has recently returned, though the wound is still fresh, right? He does get blindsided by the rest of Lesu. And so there's that scene where he's talking with War Dog, and War Dog's like, all right, you going to work with us now? And Rick says, oh, I'm dying to get back with the old Lesu. Now that I know I can trust you guys, I really want to get back with you. Except I don't want to get effing back with you at all. And so that's the thing about Rick, is that it's weird to call him an open book because he does keep something secretive like his first idol find. But if he does have a certain opinion about you, he is more than happy to like express it in a pretty energetic way, which people might not necessarily be receptive to. When he plays his idol as well, like he makes this big speech of like, all right, well, Ron and Julie, I know you're both rats and you can't be trusted. So that's why I'm doing this. Again, can be very fun for the jury, not so much for the people you're hoping to keep you in the game the minute you don't have an idol or the immunity necklace.
Yes. And I think part of that is the influence that his time on the edge of extinction had over him. There are two Rick Devens. The OG Manu, just original
There's
Manu
kind of
tribe.
like Rick in the pre-merge, then he officially becomes Devens in the post-merge.
Yes, he is. I think that's a good way to put it. So Rick, when Rick comes into the game, fresh-faced, walks into the game, he is quickly in a majority on his tribe. He's actually the first person to bring up the fact that Reem and Wendy and Keith are always to themselves. He's like, oh, we have an easy vote. He even says that in front of the rest of his tribe. So I think he always knows where the numbers are. I think that's another positive actually in the pros section for Rick Devens, but he was, kind of flying high. I mean, he was part of the Chris Underwood blindside, which ends up, I guess, being the reason that Chris Underwood won, but whatever. They couldn't have known that because they didn't know about the edge at the time. But he really was playing a very strong game early on. And I think the problem that he gets into is the fact that he was just in a 5. You want to be in that in the majority of the majority, right? In that sub alliance. And he was on the minority of that 5-person alliance, which I don't think he realized until they swapped. I think everyone thought they had War Dog, who played a better strategic game than I remember. I know he was definitely if War Dog was coming back, I think I would have more issues with the way that he maybe played socially with other players. But Rick really was flying high before he got swapped in and then ultimately voted out in the fourth vote. He comes back and is like a totally different guy. I mean, he still has the humor. He's still like, I think having a lot of fun, but he is willing to say things publicly that he would have previously said in confessionals, which sometimes I think was actually refreshing to the other players. I think there were times where they were like, we know what Rick is thinking because he's going to tell us, but also it rubs people the wrong way. And it's part of the reason that he wasn't included on a lot of these votes, especially like, the first two votes after the merge, Joe goes out and Eric goes
Eric
out.
Haveman.
Original comma. He had like no relationships with either of those guys. He would have been a perfect person for the minority to bring in, but I think they just saw him as a loose cannon at that point. And they, they had the Manus were turning in on themselves while the commas were also falling apart.
Well, expound on these pros lists a bit. What do you think is Rick's biggest strength coming into season 50?
So I think that what I noticed, and this is not just early on, I have some examples from early on in the game, players that he's playing with. I think he has a natural charisma. And I think that players who are not even working with him often come to him with information. Mm-hmm. So in the first episode, Reem, who was the first boot, who spent the whole game essentially on the edge of extinction, she is the only person that you really see her talking strategy with outside of Keith and Wendy, who are her allies, is Rick. She comes up to them and like tries to like suss out if he's really working with that majority group, which she knows he is, but she's talking to him. She's having a dialogue with Devens. When Wendy is on the chopping block, she comes to both Devens and his ally, David Wright, and wants to try to pull them in. So I think that he is seen, at least early on, as a flexible player who is willing to work with you, even though he was very clearly in a majority group. I think he did a good job of making people on the bottom feel like he could work with them, which is, I think, very important because, an idol is played. You're probably not going to be the name that's brought up as the person who could go home if there's if the idol negates votes, or if there's a flip, they're not necessarily going to flip on you if they see you as a person that they could work with later in the game. I can't say the same about in this game, at least, Wentworth, Lauren, and War Dog, who was very, very clearly a 3. And I don't think anyone on the bottom saw them as people that they could work with. Rick and David were more flexible in that early spot. Also, when Big Wendy had her plan about releasing the chickens, the only person that she tells is Rick Devens. She said she wants Rick to help her release the chickens because her ankle was hurt. And Rick was like, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to get my hands dirty, but I also won't tell on you. And I think that's just like, I think that's a good instinct to have on Survivor. Like, I'll keep your secret. That doesn't really affect the game. I'm not going to help you do it, but I'm not going to tell on you. I'm going to try to gain a little bit of loyalty here from you. And if you do it, great, release the chickens. I don't care.
Yeah, I think probably Rick's biggest quality that ends up playing the most across his 38 days in the game is hustle, which makes sense. He works in a small market circuit in news. Like, he's up at the wee hours in the morning trying to make a story work. And we see, especially again, when he becomes Devens, how much that comes into play. When he ends up having to play an idol, he is back out in the jungle the next morning looking for one. When he finds, I think, his third idol, he tells himself, I'm going to win this game. I'm working harder than everybody else. And I kind of believe it. The amount of enthusiasm and energy that he has in general, despite the wall he came up to from a competition perspective in terms of the way people were regarding him socially and strategically, like the Kool-Aid Man, he busted through that every single time. And not only that, even when he had sort of safety in his pocket, he was finding new ways to be able to control the situation. I think most infamously at the final 5, a week prior, he had made not 1, but 2 fake idols. And he decides to hide them around the jungle, hoping, okay, if people find them, then they will be dissuaded from looking elsewhere, thinking they found the idol. And so I will be able to look for it and find it myself. And Julie and Lauren both do. And he finds the real one. It leads to this absolute chicanery at Tribal Council where both of them play it. They both slip on these banana peels. The jury is shocked. And then Rick gets up, plays it on Gavin. And so I think that especially in a season that is going to bring in, as he will name it, a Billie Eilish boomerang idol, if there is someone who might be seen as the person most likely to innovate or be able to make something work because of the advantages that are either being given to him or that he acquires, it would be Rick Devens.
I totally agree with that. And I think that we could really draw a distinction between his fake idols and then the previous season. This is also going to be a season 50 returnee, Angelina, who was torn to shreds for making a fake idol. And I think it comes down to the reasons he made it. He made his fake idols because he wanted the other players to find them, get complacent, think that there's no idol. Angelina's was seen as more of a trick on Dr. Allison. So I think the jury ate it up. The other players in the game were not, I think, annoyed at Rick for making these fake idols. I think they understood the strategy behind it.
Well, so I think Scorpion and the Frog, right? Like, of course Rick would do this. Frickin' Rick at the end of all this.
It is his nature.
All right. Well, Jordan, let's look ahead to who Rick will be playing alongside against, including the aforementioned Angelina. But when it comes to actually having their feet hit the sand, who do you think are going to be some of Rick's closest allies, his best friends in this game?
So it's interesting that he when he plays the game, his biggest ally is clearly David Wright. We've talked about that a lot. When I look at this list, is he going to go for another David Wright type? If he does, I think that Mike White is maybe in personality and also job the closest to David Wright. Doesn't necessarily mean he's looking for another David Wright. I don't know. Could that make it a little bit too obvious? But I could see Mike White as the type of personality that he works with. I could see Christian Ubicki, another one of my favorite characters from the 30s, and that's, I'm sort of trying to manifest that because I would love to see that alliance. I think it would be so much fun. So I think those are two guys that would fit that David Wright archetype. If he's like, David, David never really screwed me over except when he was potentially not going to give me the half idol. But he ended up doing it anyway. So I think those are the types of people he could work with. But he also talks about his philosophy of Survivor early on in the season. And I think this is pre-Edge. I think this is Rick, not Devin. So take this with a grain of salt. And he says, my strategy in this game is to get with big guys and kind of slip through. David might be my guy. We say the whole game. I guess I didn't really write this in full sentences.
The only time that someone called David Wright a big guy.
Yeah. Well, I think he was maybe talking more about his reputation. But if we're looking at Rick Devens, that philosophy, if that carries through into 50, and there was actually a point where he was trying to get like War Dog and Ron Clark, who had like, I guess were big targets at the time. I can see him maybe trying to work with like some of the winners, maybe D, who's going to come in with a big reputation for winning, and D and Savannah, you have the whole news connection. So you have someone who's a winner who we just saw one. Well, actually, they didn't see it, but they're going to know that she's on there for a reason, right? So I could see him trying to work with some of the winners, and then also just like big personalities, Coach Q, Sari. I would love to see that connection because I don't think people would necessarily put them together. And then the biggest guy out there, Jonathan and Ozzy. I do think I could see him trying to use a strategy where he knows he's a target. He knows he's going to get a lot of attention, but he's also on season 50 with a lot of other people like that. So he might want to try to put these targets ahead of him and kind of maybe lay in the weeds a little bit.
Yeah, I think the Savannah connection is the one that I'm most intrigued by because not only is she someone who has worked in the news, she is also in Georgia. And I flat out asked her in my preseason interview, who would have thought for season 50, do you know Rick Devens? And she says, well, we have a few mutual connections, but I've never met him before. And she might get the chance to do so here. Do you think, Jordan, that might be a commonality that is enough to connect him to one of the biggest unknown factors in this cast?
I mean, I think naturally, if you're in a room with someone and you have the same profession, you're going to have things to talk about because you share a background, you share experiences. I think it's good that he never really worked with Savannah because Savannah talked about her experience with some of the people she worked with.
That's true.
I'm happy Rick wasn't one of the ones like
Rick was one of those people.
Rick would be the first. If he was one of those people, she would come after, and he wouldn't even realize. I think because he's never seen her play, she would be coming after him with knives.
Imagine if he knew her though. Like, what a wild experience. Imagine if you had this like big grudge with a coworker a couple of years ago, and then you arrive on this big returnee season after being 6 years away from the game, and you hit the beach, and the first thing you see is the person that you have this grudge with completely outside of the game competing alongside you for $1 million. Yeah.
I think my philosophy would be make nice to them and then get them before they can get me. And they'd probably be thinking the exact same thing.
Well, aside from our fan fiction here of the Atlanta newscasting world, who do you think might be some of Rick's biggest pieces of opposition out of this cast?
who is going to find Rick annoying? I think that's really what we're looking for. I think that let me look at this list. Okay. Is Jenna Lewis gonna like Rick Devens? I feel like she's maybe going to see Rick as like is he like another Richard Hatch? He's like a big kind of guy who wants to like, I mean, a very different player obviously than Richard Hatch. Richard Hatch was on the top the whole time in their season together. Well, actually, at least their first season together. But I could see maybe her finding Rick annoying. Angelina. I think Angelina and Rick would be, could be a natural alliance, but I could also see them getting under each other's skin. Maybe Emily Flippin. I could see her kind of being over Rick's antics pretty quickly. You know what's interesting that we haven't talked about? Rick and Aubrey.
They spent 6 days on the edge of extinction together.
They were there. So, and I don't really have an indication of Aubrey's thoughts about Rick, but I do know that when Rick was doing his antics at Tribal Council, she was making a lot of great faces. Aubrey was a great juror in terms of her like facial reactions, and she was always all over what Rick was doing. So she might have a natural inclination to want to work with him. You know who I could see not loving Rick, and now that I'm looking at all the names right now, I feel like he's not a. I think Joe's not going to see him as one of his people. I could see if he works with Joe, because Joe, when you look at the people that Joe worked with, you have Eva, and he had like his kind of his honor integrity thing. I could see there being some sort of like maybe Joe Coach Colby thing, which I hope doesn't happen. I don't know if I see Rick as part of that. I think he could view Rick as sneaky.
I think when you talk about people that might be over Rick's shenanigans, I feel like Tiffany is the one that really hits in my mind.
Yes.
I think back to Stop Making the Block Hot, the things that she was saying to Banu and Q during those initial Yanu votes. I could see something where, again, Rick loves Tribal Council. Like, if people consider Tribal Council theater, this guy is like the Audra McDonald of Tribal Council. Like, he is ready to put on a show every single time he gets in front of Jeff Probst. And so if Tiffany's in an alliance with him and she's like, you are doing way too much, you are having people try to veer off of the course when I just want us to stay where we are, that could be something that unnerves her as well as other people. But this all then goes back to like the larger question that you asked, which is people already know this about Rick, right? Rick obviously took a lot of people by surprise with the stuff he was doing in Edge of Extinction. With this kind of already built in to, signing a contract to bring Rick Devens on as an ally, will that matter that much?
I don't necessarily think it'll matter all that much, because he's also, and I said this before, he's also playing with Coach, who is, I think Rick is incredibly self-aware. I think Rick, maybe some of his posts, like post-Edge stuff right when he came back, I think he was in a bad mood. I think he was mad that he got voted out. He came back. He wanted vengeance. I don't think that was really the Rick that we saw for the majority of the post-merge. I think that overall he's a very self-aware player. I think that Coach really buys into his own character more than somebody like Rick. I think that Q is just I think that's who Q is. I think that Rick is maybe a more strategic player than either one of those two people. And I know, again, it's hard to, with Rick and strategy, I know he was on the minority of a lot of votes, but we saw his inner thoughts in his confessionals. We know that he has a head for the game. He talked a lot about, what strategies were going to be best for him. And it wasn't just idols, advantages, and getting himself further with those kind of things. He did know he had to make a lot of relationships, and he did. They just didn't necessarily pan out. I almost think that the new era equivalent of Rick is like a Jake O'Kane, who knows the game.
That's a really good comparison.
Day one super fan like Rick. Rick's first confessional, he talks about being a day one fan. I think Jake would probably beat Devens in a trivia contest. I can almost guarantee that. But Jake was somebody who was always thinking about the game, was always running numbers. And not just the numbers of the players who won Survivor. He was always talking about like what the best move was going to be, and it didn't usually pan out for him. He was on the minority in a lot of votes. But I think if Jake O'Kane came back and played Survivor and he played a masterful strategic game, I don't think anyone would be that surprised if Jake was able to get in a majority. He's a very likable guy and kind of run the game. I can see Rick having that upside as well. And I think Jake was someone who, yeah, did he maybe get under a couple people's skin a little bit, but overall, I think he was very well liked.
Jordan Kalish, why will Rick Devens win Survivor 50?
Rick Devens will win Survivor 50 because people will crave his humor. And I think that if people are buying in to the Rick Devens form of humor, I think that is going to benefit him. I think that they will want him around. I think they will see him if he has this moniker of being an open book, maybe he's someone they want working with him. I think that he is a big shield. I think that if people want to get themselves further in the game, maybe it's not a winning strategy for Rick. Maybe it gets him far into the game. But look, you let him get too far. He is really good at challenges. He's really good at finding idols. I mean, who knows if he's good at finding the Billie Eilish boomerang idol? We don't, that could be maybe that's out of his expertise. But he's good at finding regular idols. And he it's not only the 3 he found and the the idol that was given to him when he came back to the Edge. He was also in possession of a half idol when Chris came back. So really, he had 4.5 idols on his season. And that we were just talking about why Rick is going to win. Can we transition to what can maybe make Rick lose?
Please go ahead. Let's balance the equation a bit.
We talked about some of the things that Rick probably needs to improve on. He probably should keep some of his pettiness to the confessionals and not necessarily to other players' faces, even though I hope he does that because I want to see it on TV. It makes him a great character. But I think we talked about like some of his mistakes and the fact that he wasn't in on the votes. That is not why Rick Devens ultimately lost Survivor. Rick Devens lost his season for one reason, and it's at the final 5. He gives Chris the half idol back, which he did not have to do when Chris came into the game. He had the same idol that Devens had, that he gave half of it to David Wright. Chris had to give him half an idol, and it was up to Devens to give it back to him or not give it back to him. Devens gives it back in order to, I think, gain loyalty. And I think he just he talked to Jeff about this at the finale. He said he felt like he couldn't not give it back. And, Mike Ehrmantraut said no half measures. I think that was a major half measure. They could have gotten Chris out at the final 5. Instead, Chris ends up going on to win the game. And that is the reason why I feel like David Bloomberg, why Rick Devens lost the game. If he had withheld that idol, it would have been brutal. It would have been hard to do to his face. But Devens was so close to the end anyway. He would have won against anybody at the end. Letting Chris get there, who was clearly the strongest, the challenge competitor outside of him, the strongest fire person, which I think that he probably could have surmised from the fact that Gavin and Julie just didn't seem all that confident about their fire making ability. I think he needed to withhold that. And I think if he does any sort of half measure in 50, it could end up biting him in the butt again. I think he needs to go full tilt boogie.
Yes, so we shall see. What I'm really excited about for Rick is, as you mentioned, he has a lot of enthusiasm for Survivor proper, wanting to leave essentially no regrets upon the grains of sand in Fiji. And I think that that's perfect for a season like this, where I think production and Jeff are really beating this point home of this is season 50. You need to make sure that we cast you for a reason, that you make this a season to remember. And regardless of where he places from 1st to 24th, I think Rick is absolutely going to do that. And Jordan Kalish, it's only appropriate that you brought as much enthusiasm for this Rick Devens podcast as much as Rick brings the enthusiasm to everything he does on Survivor. Thank you so much for offering your expertise on all things Devens. Anything else you want to plug right now? I mean, we're in the throes of the off season. I know that Twish is hibernating at the moment, but anything else you'd like to plug for the listeners out there?
Yes, Twish currently is on the edge of extinction, and will as always make its return for season 50 once Survivor starts. I am hosting a traders viewing party in New York City, if you're there, on January 8th at St. Pat's Bar on West 46th Street. So
chances are this will have come out after January 8th. So, but I'm assuming you will do frequent traders viewing parties at St. Pat's.
Yeah, I don't know if it's going to be every week at this point. I think it's too early to say, but I will post about it, so you will know if you want to go to a traders viewing party. But yeah, I hope that in that case, I hope that I saw all of you listening at the traders viewing party, every single one of you. And I also want to plug, this was the first full season rewatch. I think that no, that's not true. Because I've watched Tocantins during the new era. This was the first time I had rewatched The Edge of Extinction from beginning to end since it aired. And I've always been a little bit down on it because of the twist, because of the fact that Chris comes back and wins. And it's still a bummer when I see it happen. Nothing against Chris. He seems like a nice guy, but he didn't really play Survivor. It sort of feels like an incomplete season, but Edge of Extinction is an absolute joy to watch. Like it's so much fun. There's a lot of really good characters. I think the players of all the seasons where they had returners and new people, I think the new people were the strongest on this season, and they really outplayed the returning players on the Edge of Extinction. It also was just refreshing. I mean, we've seen so much sameness in the new era, and this was a totally feels like a throwback, even though it was only a year before the new era started. This is what, 2018, 2019? I think 2019. It just it felt like I was watching the Survivor I grew up with again, even though it was, 38 seasons after it. So I would say, find an old season or find a pre-new era season that you haven't watched in a while and rewatch it and really take it in. You don't have to take 5 pages of notes about one player like I did, and I was doing it for this podcast, but it was so much fun watching it. I really got not just an appreciation of Devens, but a lot of the characters on that season who I hadn't thought a lot about in the last couple of years. But it really was, it felt so new, even though it's old, because it's just so much different than the new era of Survivor.
Sage wisdom as usual from Jordan Kalish. Well, thank you again so much, Jordan. Next time you'll hear from me, we'll be profiling a player that maybe took a page out of Rick Devens' book when it came to creating tribal council theatrics, and that is the one, the only, the man, the myth, the legend, RIZGOD, Riz God, baby, Rizzo Velovic, one of our most recently minted players. And I'll be talking about that with Liana Boris about one of the biggest X factors of the season and what that might mean for his run on Survivor 50. Otherwise, let us know your thoughts in the comments. How do you think Rick will do? Do you think this type of routine will work in a returning player season, or will this get him unceremoniously booted early once again? And there's no Edge of Extinction this time, as far as we know. But thank you all, as always, so much for listening. Until next time, everybody, take care. Bye-bye.
This is RHAP. We know reality TV.